All right.
Zane and I are just laughing behind stage because we both have a lot of wins, a lot of good things happening, and a lot of things just happening in general. But one thing that's happening out there is Chat GPT. We're gonna have some fun. Zane already told me he's gonna try to make me cry. We're gonna do a little role play back and forth on the good things and bad things of Chat GPT, how we can utilize it in space, and kind of what it is in general. So stay tuned. We'll play the reel here in a second, and then we'll get going. I even see Zane behind the screen has his own dance, the RPHLI theme song. So that's fantastic, buddy. Hey, so speaking of dance, you and I are going to dance, buddy. We're going to talk Chat GPT. I'm going to take the perspective, Zane, of wanting to use it more because of the failings we currently have in the system. And then you take the more moderate kind of response to it would be fantastic. But tell us, Zane, in general, what is Chat GPT?
So just for the audience, I'm on the right side and he's on the wrong side. So just let's set that up. ChatGPT is a AI. What's the word I'm looking for? It's an AI created by OpenAI, right? So
Just
the
so
thing
everybody
that
knows, I did flip our sides, so I just flipped myself over to the other side.
okay, so I gotta look this way. Okay, yeah. So ChatGPT is it's OpenAI is a company that created ChatGPT. So funny enough, they've had the AI thing before. To me, what makes ChatGPT really revolutionary is not necessarily the AI engine; it's more so the interface that it has. I kind of wrote about this actually a couple of weeks ago. Was it allows lay people like you and I to interact with a really complex AI engine, right? Usually in the past, you would have to write some code. I mean, it wasn't really complicated code. You really, honestly, it's like 4 or 5 lines of code to do what you needed. But ChatGPT allowed like the masses to kind of interact with AI, which is why it became so popular. It's so easy. You literally just ask it a question. It's going down what we normally do, right? Of Google, we just ask Google a question, and that's what ChatGPT does. So that's that. So in terms of how we can use it right now, I will be open and honest. I do not pay for GPT-4, so I have not personally used GPT-4. I've used GPT-3 and the stuff before GPT-3, so to all that stuff, right? Um, it is great for prompting, right? Like, if you ask it like, "Hey, what are the top 3 things about a subject," right? You just ask it those kind of questions. It can kind of prompt you if you're trying to write something. I've even heard people using it to write an email for them, like, "Hey, can you write a positive email that talks about this?" Boom. That saves a lot of time. But where we run into issues is when we're asking it complex things. So you can look online where Bing is Microsoft search engine that is using OpenAI's AI engine, where it kind of started threatening the users. It really can't do it can't really do math really well right now as well. It kind of trips up on that. Um, and then in terms of like using it for clinical work or like professional work, I would pump the brakes on that, because what is going on is it sounds really smart the way it's answering the question, but it's not always right. So you need to have some sort of domain knowledge to make sure that what the output is accurate. And that is one thing that I don't think it's ready for. It's not ready for prime time in the sense of, us asking it like, "Hey, what is the treatment for X? What is the treatment for Y?" And a lot of times you can ask it for sources and it'll literally just make up sources. So it's great for like small things, small like little tasks, but it's not good for what people are force feeding it into right now.
Yeah, so I think you bring up lots of good points, not great points, but good points, right? With
Oh,
ChatGPT, here's the piece that I feel like when I'm playing the devil's advocate side, because I mean, in truth, I do agree with Zane, but I'm not playing that role today.
I
What
mean,
I'm
it
going to
is
do is
called
this.
Devil's Advocate has the word devil in it. That's all I'm saying. That's all I'm
It,
saying.
it does. Tying dots together. With ChatGPT, here's the systems we currently have in place, Zane, when it comes to asking for information. Oftentimes, what we're using inside of individual facilities are outdated, antiquated, non personalized recommendations. So we're using a data source that is saying, hey, I'm going to look up this general information and see how to treat an individual. And I'm pulling it from something that is potentially outdated. There are some physicians that have been in lawsuits because they were practicing medicine from 12 to 15 years ago because they have not stayed updated on what is happening in current practice. Some of the other things we're doing with databases. So oftentimes databases that are going into play, look up online, look at comparatives between different drug databases and the number of interactions that they show, the severity levels of those interactions. Wildly different. None of them match. None of them even close to match what they're actually projecting back onto us as an audience. And here's the next thing in there when they're showing like, here's the interactions, here's the issues with these individual medications being able to interact with each other. It is so severely both click and alert fatigued that oftentimes we're just turning them off, right? Either mentally we're turning them off or physically those are getting turned off inside of the background. So in my mind, it's really, okay, ChatGPT being able to gather and collate information that is applicable back to the individual. If we can feed it the appropriate information, that it is not just leveraging the wide world of internet, and we're able to leverage an internal data source, to be able to reference. There's some really easy ways to see how it is a lot better than what we're currently practicing with, because what we're currently practicing with is giving us cookie cutter medicine that oftentimes doesn't agree with itself. And by following what the cookie cutter medicine is currently doing, we're ending up getting more and more patients hurt. We have utilization rates of drugs of under 50% of the actual diagnoses, sending them out with a medication. 50% are picking them up or actually using them to adherence levels. And we're seeing a number of individuals with non-optimized medication regimens because somebody was following the algorithms, someone was following what's currently available in healthcare, and now we're sending people back into acute situations or acute harm situations where those medications are failing them because of the current status of what we're looking at. Zane, what do you say?
So I actually agree with a lot what you said. I think you and I are actually on the same page. So what the scenario that you just laid out is a perfect example of where AI could be amazing, because it's a lot of black and white, right? Either it interacts or it doesn't interact, right? Are you on the right treatment or you are not, or are you not on the right treatment, right? Based on your diagnosis code. Like, that stuff where AI is perfect for. It doesn't have to think, it just needs to synthesize information that already exists out there, but just give it to us in a way that's easy for us, it's palatable for us, and for really anyone, right? So
Right.
that's where AI is perfect. Where AI isn't perfect is like, me going in like, hey, patient has these symptoms. What do they have? I mean, it could work that way, right? Yes. But that that I would I would kind of press the brakes. Also, worst case scenario is, at least with that, you have hopefully somebody who can see something, be like, okay, this doesn't really make sense, whatever. We can get differential. Actually, pull that back. I know some companies that are doing differential diagnosis based on
Yep.
AI companies. So they're not giving you a definitive diagnosis, but they're giving you differentials.
Yep. With
For people that
exponentials.
don't know, differential diagnoses are, you know, a list of things that it could be, right? Not necessarily the thing that it is, but a bunch of diagnoses that it could be. So you kind of run through that, run your tests, all that stuff. Anyways, so but where I see the problem with ChatGPT and like things like this is when people are talking about replacing the clinician, right? Where
Mhm.
you're saying to the patient, like, hey, all you need to do is go log in, and say, hey, what medication do I need for this? So a couple of problems right there, right? A, the patient doesn't know exactly what is a symptom and what is not a symptom, right? B, they have no idea what they're reading is accurate. As I told you, like, maybe one day we can do this. We can just go on ChatGPT live and just like start typing
Oh, we
questions, and
should.
I think it would be kind of interesting. But
Yeah.
the few times I've done it, it works for like simple things like, oh, I have the flu. How do you treat the flu? It'll tell you like generally speaking. But when you ask it for sources, that's where it kind of makes stuff up. So actually, I agree with you. Those are great use cases, and I think those are the use cases that actually will help us, right? So you put in a medication, boom, it tells you what, and it could possibly give you recommendations on other medications, right? Right. Hey, this one does not. This one is in the same class. I mean, it's a hypertensive medication, but it does not interact with this medication, right? It can give you kind of like a differential. It can give you a list of drugs. You're like, okay, yeah, we can do that one instead.
I think that's fantastic. We should definitely do that sometime soon, of going on there and asking questions, because I think that's the differentiator though, Zane, is we would be going on there with our backgrounds to be able to
Mhm.
say this makes sense or doesn't, or I need to look this up. Like, I need to make sure this makes sense, because I'm not willing just to go, oh yeah, this algorithm pumped it out to me, so I'm just going to do it. And I think that becomes the problem in cookbook medicine. We already see today is, well, that's what the guideline says, so I'm going to prescribe that. And so oftentimes we're seeing the exact same issues in both spaces. So it's really the users that are utilizing and we're manipulating the AI. And it's no different from any technology. What's the old saying? Garbage in, garbage out. And so the way that we format those prompts, which is interesting, because the way you work those prompts and the way you continue to lead the prompt can refine, the information that's coming back out in a more positive way. But like you're saying, Zane, I think the real issue is, yes, I agree with everything I was saying if it's a clinician or someone that is an expert in the space. I totally disagree with Kevin. Third person talk there, getting in trouble. If it is someone that is just on the outside, having no idea what they're looking up and going, okay, this sounds like a good idea. So for me, it would be like looking up a recipe or looking up a new cocktail or whatever it might be, of saying like, oh, this sounds good, throwing it together and eating something that my wife would say, Kevin, what are you thinking? Like, this would never make sense for us to put these things together, for a dish or a meal. And you and I thinking the exact same thing clinically. It doesn't make any sense to be able to put these things together. And two, you only fed it part of the information. So it didn't have the other details that are, highly pertinent to be able to pump out the information that you kind of need. So I think those can be helped. Saying, any thoughts on how do we make it better? Like with ChatGPT, what do you see as being like the next iteration that get pulled into healthcare? You and I have talked about several companies that are using things like this already in
Yeah.
space. How are they differentiating from just what's available there with OpenAI to making it more medically appropriate?
I mean, I think they're solely medical companies, right? They're not looking at everything everywhere all at once. Great movie, by the way, guys. Um, they that's one thing, right? We need something that's medically focused, and because in itself, medical data in itself is a lot of data in there, right? And you need good data. So, like a lot of these companies are trying to realize, like, hey, the problem with medical data is it doesn't. There's a lot of it that exists, but a lot of it is not um, accessible to these third parties for various different reasons. Either it's proprietary file formats that are just not usable unless you buy that $100,000 whatever equipment, or HIPAA laws exist. And I mean, there are interesting things coming out to kind of skirt those kind of things and still keep the privacy of the patient. But so that's the one thing, right? They're very medical focused. And in terms of Chat GPT, like specifically, I listened to an interview of for Sam Altman, who is the CEO of OpenAI, and they have something. The way they make ChatGPT better is, so every time you ask it a question, you can give it a thumbs up or thumbs down, right? So you can say this was a good answer, not a good answer. So they're finding that that's how they're kind of figuring out if it's the right answer or not the right answer, and it's kind of homing it in and making it better. So ironically, the more people that use it, the better off it becomes, right? And hopefully, there's not people feeding it wrong stuff. Like hopefully there's not too many trolls on there like saying, "Yeah, this is a great answer," when it's a terrible answer. So that's an interesting way that they're doing it. But we cannot. How should I say this? We can use that method in medicine once we have a solid foundation, if that makes sense. So once we have an AI system that is right, I would say, well, as close to 100% as possible, but then we can tweak it, right? Then we can throw in like different demographics at it and things like that. Like we can tweak it to your specific patient population, because as we know, your genetics, your background, all that stuff can dictate what medication you should be on, what you're more susceptible to, all that stuff, right? Maybe in the beginning we don't get all that data, but maybe we can crowdsource that kind of information and build off of that.
That makes a ton of sense. I think that the some really interesting scenarios is, like right now, Zane, I'm literally, let me pop this so you can see it. So share your screen. Talking through, when you share screens, if you do not talk through when you're doing it, I don't know how you do that. Like, that's a whole nother level of focus. So in here, this was an actual patient case that I had the other day with a 5-year-old with a G-tube and antibiotic choice for a UTI. And here is what ChatGPT popped out there. And so just gave kind of like what common things are available for UTIs, in children. And that gave kind of a list. And then, knowing what you and I know, Zane, like we're thinking, well, what else do you need inside of that? Like we need to know what the creatinine clearance is, one for the patient, what other medications have they taken, what are their allergies, all of those things are going to be necessary. What other medications are they on? What are their like tube schedules? All of those things would be pertinent. And so just plugging in more information for refinement of saying, hey, we failed Bactrim, recently. Great. And now it plugs out and pulls in cephalexin, amoxicillin, nitrofurantoin, cefixime, and gentamicin. Pretty broad range, buddy, of things that really aren't detailed down to what we would usually see as like, okay, here is the cephalosporin generation that we would use or recommend for this individual patient. And then here's how you'd give it via G-tube if you need to mix it with water, if it was something that had too high of concentrations of sorbitol, whatever the case may be for stomach upset. So a really good example, unfortunately, really pointing back to Zane being the one right in this conversation.
It's good to be right all the time.
It is. You're always right, buddy. You're always right. On my screen, I'm on the right now, so I guess that's the only help I have. But I do think that there's good data that it pumps out. Some information, I guess, for what do you think when folks are using it, Zane? If they're using it to validate clinical decisions, because you and I both know that Dr. Google is very much so present. Now it's going to be Dr. ChatGPT, right?
And so that's, yeah. Oh, sorry. No, I mean, so like you kind of saw on the screen, it's a good place to start, but it shouldn't dictate the end decision, right? And that's where I come in. Like, yes, it can give you information that's somewhat right. I mean, even I kind of skimmed through that, and it's in the area, it's in the ballpark, it's in the area. And if I was like, okay, cool, it kind of gives me a place to start, but it's not enough to give me like, okay, this is what I need to do. Like I need to take that, distill it through other information, like you mentioned, and then through hopefully my clinical mind, and then come up with the best answer, right? So again, kind of going back to, it's a great starting point for things, right? It can prompt you to, write something, or it can prompt you in the right direction, hopefully, but it cannot do it for you, right? And I think a lot of people are kind of putting the cart before the horse in terms of AI, and like saying, hey, it's replacing us, it's doing this, it can do all of these things, but it really can't. But what it can do is still powerful, but we just need to use it the way it's right now suitable to use. And because what I'm afraid of is, I'm not a hater of AI. I love AI. But like what I'm afraid of is it's going to start getting used improperly, cause issues, and that's going to set us back another 5-10 years because people have lost trust in the system. And that's what I don't want, right? I want it to be used properly. I want it to be implemented properly, so that way we can innovate much quicker, right? I don't want to go backwards where we were, before COVID, where we were doing things that, we were like literally 20 years behind some industries, some sectors. So we're in a good place right now in the sense that we have created a community that's pushing for innovation. Let's not stop that, but also let's be cognizant of what tools we're using, and we're using them for the right thing, right? Not everything is if you only have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Like that's what I'm afraid AI is going to turn into, is just a hammer, and everything's going to turn into a nail, and then we're going to be forced to go back because we're going to have, I mean, foreseen consequences. In my eyes, they're foreseen, and for a lot of people, it'll be unforeseen consequences.
No, I totally agree with you. I mean, I think the hammer and nail kind of analogy is perfect. It's kind of like the opportunity that we saw in the VC space when it came to digital health investing without clinical validation, and now we're seeing like some of the 2023 trends. We're going to have to see more clinical validation with these individual groups. We're seeing more and more companies come out there and start to validate like digital health technologies and applications, to say if they're viable or not. And I think you said it so many times, Zane, which I love, is if we can find technology to enhance us, to make us faster, to make us process more information more quickly, and then give us the ultimate decision to use our background, clinical expertise, understandings of, human emotion, connectivity, relationships, etc., to distill that information across and make it viable. Lots of wins with ChatGPT and other AI technology. And so
Yeah.
that's where I kind of see it in the space in general, buddy. But I do think that this will not be the last conversation we have on leveraging AI inside of healthcare, because you and I both know it's going to be a steamroller.
Yeah.
Why? Because there's money in it.
Mhm.
There's money in being able to pull it back. So I think that is the job of all clinicians out there. Zane and I are talking to you, to be able to leverage it and recognize where the pitfalls are for both your patients, your institutions, and the businesses that you're potentially running, to be able to control kind of what's going out there and keeping patients safe. Zane, parting words, brother?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with everything you say. That's the reason why I tell people to kind of understand the technology, use it. You don't have to be an expert at it, but just understand the capabilities of it. So when somebody does come to you, you can make a good case for or against it. And the one thing I always say, augment, not replace. AI is great to augment us, but it will not replace us. And I will leave it at that.
Boom. If you guys want to hear more, come over to the technology channel on our PH Ally, get all kinds of good information from Digital Thoughts, and let's start the conversation there on what we can do in the pharmacy space on leveraging AI appropriately. All right, guys, you have a wonderful evening, and we'll talk soon.
Bye, guys.